code with people or no? Have them
No,
go
no,
to
no,
Facebook?
no, no, no. That's for you.
I see. So you
But
don't.
but
We're about
but
to start.
the show will be
Okay.
on the air immediately after we're done. It's live with my Facebook, and you will have a professional copy right off of YouTube.
They'll listen to the conversation. We're about to start.
Okay, good.
All right, we're starting.
Okay, you ready to count me down there?
3, 2, 1.
All right. Welcome once again to Justice Conversations, the ivory tower of the street. Dr. Brian O'Neill, Luis Suave Gonzalez, and we're happy to have a guest with us today. That's TASHA Williams, who's the deputy prosecutor from New York. She has a lot of past experience in the system and outside the system. A graduate of Widener Law School, all the way back to her interning days in Lehigh County Public Defender's Office. She did a research analysis for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives for many years. Adjunct professor at Community College of Philadelphia. Also worked at Defenders Association of Philadelphia. Juvenile Justice Center, early intervention specialist. Also worked on the Inside Out program, which pairs college students with those incarcerated for classes inside a facility. She was one of the pioneers behind that program too, early workers in that program. So I'm sure we're missing some of the highlights, but I just want to give the audience a little idea of what we're talking about. And she is here also to talk about her latest venture, which is to seek a judicial seat in Luzerne County, Dauphin County. I got it. So welcome.
Thank you so much. It is my absolute honor to be with you all this morning.
I think one of the things that unique about your background is that, you know, sitting in the chair of a judge, you've worked in various perspectives of the system. So you've seen it from both sides, that is, say, defense sides and prosecutor sides. And you've also got an idea of some of the backgrounds of people that end up in court through a lot of your other work that you've done. So that gives you, I think, a much more wide range of experience to look at people that come into your courtroom.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, I also served as a judicial law clerk for a Court of Common Pleas judge. And so I do have the perspective from the bench as well. And the ability to look at a situation, assess the facts, do the legal research, apply the law to the facts of a situation, and render a fair and just outcome is something that's very important. And so I do bring that perspective as well as I seek office in Dauphin County.
So Suave, when did you meet Latasha Williams?
Well, I know Latasha, when she used to come in as a volunteer to Gratitude Prison with the Inside Out program and other programs, she always been involved and knowing why and what can we do better to better our lives, you know, even when we was in prison. So she always been that person that coming to the prison and never judged who we were or why we was there. But she also gave us that little extra push where we could do better when we got out, if we got out. Because at the time, I was serving a life sentence. You know, so to see somebody that I could relate to, somebody that with similar, you know, background where we come from, you know, it was inspiring. And then to see where she went at after graduating school, it's even more inspiring for us to say, like, we support her. because if I'm gonna stand in front of a judge, I want it to be someone that understands where I'm coming from and why I did what I'm accused of doing. And maybe having some type of understanding and saying, you know what, I'm not going to throw away the key on you. We got to render some punishment, but it's not going to be where you're going to rot in jail for life. And that's what makes her unique for this persistent, that she understands the issue. She's been working with prisons, inside prisons, for over 20 years. Not too many judges can say that. Not too many prosecutors can say that. I've been in a prison and I talked to hundreds of lifers throughout my career, a volunteer. And be mindful, was a volunteer venture that she did. Never got paid for going into the prisons. So for her to be in that position today, leadership position that I call, is something that we all should applaud and support. And I tell you, Dauphin County is getting somebody that has the knowledge, the experience, and the compassion to be fair. Because not all judges are fair, and I can tell you that from experience. So that's why I wanted her to come on the show, because I want other people, other young women of color, especially little girls, to understand that you could be who you want to be. Just take a little work. And that's a prime example right there. Anything else, Dr. O'Neill?
Yeah, I was saying that as far as having the experience of, spending some time with the incarcerated, it means that you understand when somebody does have to go to prison, all the ramifications of that. And wouldn't casually send somebody to prison. But I know we have to have prison. We have to have some people sentenced there. That's the way it works. But I know that you will look at that as a last resort, probably.
Yes, I think it's just important to have a judge who can look at every aspect of the situation from the perspective of the victim, because usually there is a person who was harmed. Looking at it from the perspective of community and what is best for the community, what is safe for the community, but also the perspective of the defendant, and understanding that mostly all of us can be redeemed and have redeemable qualities, and understanding what drives people to commit crimes, understanding what is fair, what is the most fair and just outcome for a particular situation. Every situation requires someone who can look at it for the individual facts, the individual merits, and render a decision accordingly. And so that's what I will do if the citizens elect me as their next judge of the Court of Common Pleas in Dauphin County.
What first attracted you to the field of justice? I mean, you end up, you obviously went to law school. What was your end goal, and why were you interested in that particular type of work?
It's funny, when I began my college career many moons ago at Temple University in Philadelphia, my goal was to become a medical doctor. That didn't work out too well. I realized very early on that science was just not my thing. And then I took a course called Racial Discrimination Under the Law, and that was taught by Professor Vanessa Lawrence. And it was that course that really opened my eyes to the criminal justice system, and just sort of compelled me to want to make a difference in that area. And so the following semester, I signed up for the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program, which we talked about a little while ago. And my very first time in a prison or jail was actually one of the county prisons in Philadelphia County. I walked into the jail, and we were walking through the corridor, my peers and I and our professor, and I became physically ill, seeing human beings literally in a cage. There was this one area where there were about maybe 50 or 60 young Black men, Hispanic men in a cage, like actual bars. And the environment was just very noisy. It was just chaotic. And I was shocked to my core to see human beings treated that way. I was just absolutely shocked. I was physically ill. And so that motivated me even further. And then engaging with the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program and meeting some men who were serving life sentences, such as Suave, where the courts had sentenced them to death by incarceration. That really opened my eyes even more. And I was able to recognize that there has to be a better way, because people do have the ability to change and perhaps should not be defined by one very, very bad moment in their life where they exercised terrible judgment that resulted in a monumental loss for another family or for another person. And so I became very involved in that way. I met a wonderful woman by the name of Anne Marie Kirk during one of my visits to Greater Prison, and she and I connected right off. And she, at the time, was in the beginning stages of forming what is now a 501c3 organization, Art for Justice, and she co-founded it with a man by the name of Charles Lawson, who was and still is serving a sentence of life without parole at formerly Greater Prison, but he's now at the State Correctional Institution at Phoenix. And so I met Anne Marie and Charles Lawson, who goes by the name of Zafir. He is an artist. And she explained to me what Art for Justice was about. And I knew that I was very much interested in getting involved. And so I've been involved with Art for Justice as a volunteer and as a board member for many years now. And I currently serve as the board's president.
Wow. So that whole experience was triggered by an undergraduate class. I'm sorry,
I said shout out to Anne Marie and Charles Lawson. I know both of them on a deep level. And the reason that I was able to sharpen my skills as an artist is because of Charles Lawson. You know, so, and that's a person that I feel that deserves a second chance to be out. But again, in Philadelphia County, we don't have the type of judges that see the potential of man and woman after decades incarcerated. They don't see that. All they see is punishment and keep them away from their family. This is a man that if you put him in our community, could have a great impact, not only in our community, but nationally with his artwork, because he's a magnificent watercolor artist. And Anne Marie is somebody that I hold dear to my heart, because I met her when I was serving a life sentence many years ago, and she was always make sure that our art and our voice was being represented in different art shows, not only in Philadelphia, but across the country when we was exhibit. And it was because of her that we was able to exhibit a lot of our art nationally and locally. It's because of her that we was able, right, to establish or restore justice with art and program, because she inspired that. Before we was able to do all them programs that came after Anne Marie Kirk and offered justice into the prison, Anne Marie was there. And long after they was gone, Anne Marie is still there. So that's a testament of who they really are and what they stand for. Art for justice.
Well, I think we have to take a little break, a little commercial break here right now. So I just want to remind everybody we're tuned to Justice Conversation, Dr. Brian O'Neill, Luis Gonzalez, and LaTasha Williams, and we'll be right back after this brief message. I think we're actually at 20 minutes. That's why I was trying to time it.
Okay. So the song is playing now.
Okay.
Natasha,
Yes.
normally we do this in the studio.
Oh, it's all good. We've got to conform to the times.
but we still live on Facebook, so people are just tapping in and making comments. So
Oh, wonderful.
I'm going to ask you a little bit about the dynamics of an election, sort of how that works.
You said the dynamics of the election.
Yeah, I'll ask you about that when we come back.
Okay, we're about to start.
All right.
Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
All right. Welcome back to Just a Conversation with Dr. Brian O'Neill, Luis Suave Gonzalez, and Latasha Williams, District Attorney from New York, who is announcing her candidacy for judge in Dauphin County. And I was just wondering, Ms. Williams, about the mechanics of running for judge. You have to be aligned with a party. Are you going to be opposed by someone? How does that work exactly?
Well, it's very interesting. The race for judicial seats and the school board, they are nonpartisan races. And so candidates are allowed to cross-file, meaning that no matter what their party of registration is, they can also file for the other party so that they can appear on the ballot for Democrats as well as the ballot for Republicans. And so that is what I plan to do, because I want everyone to know, this is not partisan by any means. I am a candidate who is promoting justice for all, and I, would serve as the people's judge, everyone's judge. And so that's pretty much how the process works. We will be circulating nominating petitions very soon, within the next week or so. And that's when the real campaigning will begin. The primary election will take place on May 18th of this year. And then the general election will take place in November of this year.
I got a question for you, Natasha. As a person that's been working inside prisons for over 20 years, what do you think is the current situation with juvenile lifers and people that offended when they was juveniles, got out, and then came back for other reasons and are still stuck in prison because of that first offense that they committed when they was juveniles, and now they can't get out? What do you think about them type of situations? And as a judge, if somebody come across you in a situation where something happened in 1975, 76, and it's being held against them today to basically keep them in prison for the rest of their life, what is your advice on that for people that's listening, from a legal perspective?
So now I just want to make sure I do understand your question correctly. Are you referring to men and women who are juvenile lifers have since been released because of the United States Supreme Court ruling, and then for some other reason return to prison?
No, I'm referring to specifically to, and I'll give you a real quick example. I got out of jail, right? I had a life sentence when I was a juvenile, but I reoffended again as an adult. And now, because of that first offense as a juvenile, I'm being persecuted and being still withheld in jail. Where if I didn't have that first offense as a juvenile, I probably won't be in jail to death. I'm talking about a situation like that.
Well, I know specifically there's a case that comes to mind that's where the facts are similar to what you described, sort of. And it takes us back to Charles Lawson, the co-founder of Art for Justice. And his case is very unique. It has a very interesting procedural history. And he is someone who had been accused of committing first-degree murder back in the late 70s. And he was convicted and he received an automatic life sentence. Now, at the time of that crime, he was 17 years old, so he was a juvenile. And so he received an automatic life sentence, but he maintained his actual innocence and he challenged his conviction and his judgment of sentence all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, who did reverse his conviction on the grounds that there had been some Fifth Amendment concerns with respect to Mr. Lawson, Saphir, making statements and not having an attorney or a parental figure present when he was interviewed by police. And so when the courts reversed that conviction, the matter was set for trial again. Now, instead of rolling the dice and going back to trial, what Zafir did was, and in consultation with counsel at the time, he thought it would be in his better interest to plead guilty for a sentence that was close to time served, the time he'd already served, which was maybe 4 or 5 years in prison at that time. And so a couple of decades go by, and as a result of some personal struggles with drug addiction, Mr. Lawson found himself in a situation where he felt the need to defend himself. And that situation resulted in the loss of life. And he took a trial and he was found guilty in that trial of third-degree murder. Now, at that time, which at that point was 1991, third-degree murder carried a term of years, 10 to 20 years. But because of a sentencing law that we have in Pennsylvania, Mr. Lawson was subject to an automatic life sentence again because of the first homicide that occurred in the late 70s, where he pled guilty to, I believe it was manslaughter. And so because of that earlier conviction, he then was subject to an automatic life sentence in 1991 when the second incident occurred, and he's been incarcerated ever since. And so when you look at the law, you see that the sentence is a lawful one. However, because it's lawful, is that the most fair and just sentence when you look at the individual circumstances surrounding Mr. Lawson and both of his cases, particularly when he has always maintained his actual innocence in the very first case. And so to answer your question, as a judge, we're bound by the law. And so we have to follow it. But there's so many people that are involved in that entire process. Before it presents itself to the court, you have the defense attorneys, you have prosecutors, and oftentimes they can work situations out. And I think that there should be more of that, wherein the parties can reach an agreement that is somewhere in the middle, whereas there's justice for the victim, but the defendant also has an opportunity at redemption. And so that's what I am hopeful for as we move forward, where every person that's involved in our criminal justice system, the defense attorney, who is so integral to ensuring that a defendant's constitutional rights are not violated. But the prosecutor also has that same duty as well. As a prosecutor, it is my job to protect society, to protect victims, but it is also my job, I believe, to make sure that the criminal defendant who stands charged is receiving justice and is receiving a fair trial and due process. And so it takes all of us. It doesn't just fall in the lap of the court. And so that's what I hope will continue to happen as we move forward. And that's something that I would certainly promote.
And do you think that judges in Pennsylvania should be given the discretion to have a say so when it comes to these mandatory sentences?
I do think that there are advantages and disadvantages to discretion. Certainly, one of the advantages is that as a judge, we could look at a particular set of facts and reach the conclusion of what should happen based on the specific set of facts in this case. But the disadvantage to that is that there will be some judges who may not necessarily come down the middle and may not rule the same way on one set of facts as they would on another set of facts, albeit those facts are relatively identical. So I think that's something that is worth continued conversation. There is a debate about discretion and mandatory versus non-mandatory. But I think that discussion should definitely be furthered.
I would imagine it's going to be one of the toughest things about being a judge is being faced with a situation where you don't necessarily think a sentence is justified, but your hands are tied by the statute. And you can't deviate from the letter of the law because it is really been predetermined by the legislature. And that, to me, must be one of the most, and I know there's been judges resign over such things, just they couldn't, especially at the federal level, when mandatory was mandatory. Now there's more room to depart from those guidelines, but at one point there wasn't. And it caused a lot of soul searching for a lot of judges that were sometimes forced to render sentences that they did not think, and almost did it apologetically in many cases. So to me, that would be one of the biggest challenges, is to have your hands tied by sort of one-size-fits-all type of sentencing. It sort of takes the job away from the judge, which is really what they're there for. Is to weigh all those circumstances and to treat a case individually. That's what we trust the judge to do. So the legislators, if they don't trust the judge to make that call, they're going to make it for them. And I think there's a real problem with this one-size-fits-all mentality. And I think my co-host is an example of that. I mean, it's just so many people that would be better served than the whole system. And it just seems like that revenge base is sometimes the driving force for some of these sentences.
Because my next question to you was, as a professional, I ain't gonna say prosecutor because I don't want to come out that way, but do you believe that there is a level of racism that play a part in determining some of these cases, such as Charles Lawson?
Well, I will say that Charles Lawson in particular, his original case happened in 1978, and then the second case happened in 1991. And it is a Philadelphia County case, and Philadelphia County had some problems during that time. And I think that's clearly evident when you look at the number of people who have since been exonerated. And these are people whose cases were initiated during that period in the 1980s and the 1990s. There were problems. There were problems with the way some of the police did their investigations, problems with the way some of the police interacted with defendants in custody, problems with the way police interrogated witnesses. And so to that end, I do think that there are many police officers who are wonderful, who execute their jobs to the best of their ability and with honor and integrity. But I think there's a very small number, and I don't think it's a large number, but a small number of officers, particularly in those days where they may have had tunnel vision. And I don't necessarily believe that it was their intent or purpose to frame a person or set out to get a particular defendant, but I think sometimes in the pursuit of justice, we can develop tunnel vision and have a theory of how a crime occurred. Now, how we get to that theory, I don't know. Do we arrive at a particular theory based on our own personal experiences, based on stereotypes that we may have, based on illogical or irrational beliefs that we may have based on our own experiences or what is perpetuated by the media? I don't know, but I think that in forming these thoughts and beliefs about what happened in a particular crime, who did it, the wrong person may sometimes get caught up in the system because the investigation is tunnel vision. And sometimes we're unable to see other things that we need to see. And that's why I'm so grateful that I come with the perspective of, you know, having prosecuted, but also having advocated for defendants and working as a defense attorney, because I think I see both sides very clearly and very well. And that's very important to have in a jurist, should the people elect me.
And they will, because, you know, like, we could sit here and make it sound like it's all peaches and creams, right? But we know the dark history that a lot of our counties in Pennsylvania has when it comes to people of color. We know that, especially those that's been in the system. You meet people from different counties and with similar cases, but different sentences. And it always bothers me when I see brothers and sisters that's coming out of Huntington County with similar cases, but they got a tap in the hands and we end up with the bulk of time. And that to me is like a no-no. And it only happens because of the color of our skin and because some of them judges in them counties don't really care about us. They don't care about our livelihood. They don't care about our community. They really don't. So when I see someone that's rooted in our community, there's someone that comes from us, it's someone that we must support. And I'm talking directly to our audience. I'm talking directly to our listeners, that if we want to change it, we have to use our voice. We have to vote. And we have to vote for the right people. Because sometimes we go out there and we vote for the wrong people and we end up with the short end of the stick. We end up being in prison. We end up being railroaded. We end up being underrepresented on all levels of the criminal justice system. And we've seen that in the last 30, 40 years when it comes to juvenile lifers. We've seen that in Philadelphia with almost 12 people exonerated. You know, so we need more progressive people, not only on the bench, but in them offices that make decisions. Because once, and for the people that don't understand, once you get caught in the system, you no longer have control of your life. They control your life. The DA's office have control of your life. They can say, I'm not going to charge you up and let you go tomorrow. They've done it for people that cooperate, for people that, that they could use and lock up later on. So what I'm telling my audience is, use your conscience and vote for the right people, not only in Dauphin County, but in Philadelphia too. And we're talking about judges, district attorneys, state legislators. Vote for the people that you think and believe are going to have your interest. It's not always going to go our way, but we will always get a fair play. If we could get a fair play, that's all we want. We don't want a get out of jail free card. Just give us a fair play. Because I'll be the first one to tell you, there's some people that do belong in jail, but there's a lot of people that don't belong in jail. There's a lot of people that have been in jail 40, 50 years that deserve a chance to at least show the community that they have the potential to be that citizen that the community wants. And Charles Lawson is one of them. Charles Lawson is one of them. So what I'm telling the audience, to the people, that face you see there, LaTasha Williams, that's somebody that's sincere. That's somebody that was going into the prisons for 20 years when she didn't have to. She could have just been partying on Friday, but yet she was sitting down in the basement in the jail, talking about criminal justice issues with a bunch of lifers. That says a lot about her character. So what I'm asking y'all is that when y'all go vote, remember that today might be me, but tomorrow it could be your son, your granddaughter, your nephew, your pop. You never know what's going to happen in them counties in Pennsylvania. You never know. Look up the history. Educate yourself. And I'm not asking you to go out there and just vote LaTasha. Well, I'm just telling you, do your work, do your homework before you vote for anybody. Whether the Democrat, Republican, Independent, do your homework and use your conscience. But I do say this, if you want a fair chance, then you're going to have to start supporting your own people. Because we see what's going on in the system. We see the black faces. We see the brown faces. We see the poor white faces. Because I'm not going to sit here and say it's just black and Latino. You see the poor white faces that if they don't have the resources or the influence, their families don't have the influence, they're just in the same situation that we are. And it's time. Right now is the time for us to make a difference. Let's use it wisely.
Gentlemen, we have to take a break.
All right.
And you listening to a Justice Conversation on Usala Media Radio. We'll be right back.
Hey.
Gentlemen, we're going to come back in.
Mhm.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Justice Conversation from the Ivory Tower to the Street. Dr. Brian O'Neill, Luis Suave Gonzalez, and our guest is Miss TASHA Williams, who's going to be running for judge in Dauphin County. And, Pennsylvania, I know it's nationwide, we have a huge shortage of diversity on the bench. People of color and women. And so it's very refreshing to see a candidate that represents women and diversity at the same time. And I was wondering if you feel any undue pressure because of being in that role.
I don't feel any undue pressure. In fact, I'm so honored and humbled to just be in a position to run. I think that we are long overdue in terms of the diversity. It would be amazing for Black women coming in and out of the courthouse to be able to look up and see someone who looks like them, as there has never been a Black woman on the bench in Dauphin County Court of Common Pleas. And so I don't feel pressure. I feel excited. I'm motivated. Our team is ready to go, and I'm just ready to give it my very best shot.
So I know, I've seen research articles quoting people in Western Pennsylvania saying the only person of color they ever encountered in the courtroom was their defendant. You have Brian Stevenson, a very well-known lawyer, civil rights attorney, and pro bono and head of the Justice Center, who talked about going into court before a case, I forget what southern state it was, and being reprimanded by a bailiff. You can't be in here without your lawyer, assuming he couldn't be anything but a defendant because of his skin color. And the judge had a chuckle, and the bailiff had a chuckle over it when he corrected him and said, he was the lawyer in the case. But it was almost as if he thought he already had strikes against him based on the attitude that he was facing. So it is a very welcome move. I hope that this is becomes a very more common occurrence to have people represented not just as defendants in a courtroom, but on the bench, and that it certainly makes it a much more less than an us versus them scenario. It makes it more of a community. And I think the other huge part is the perspectives of people, not so much because of their race, but because of their social class. You can give them a perspective that is not isolated. And having judges with isolated perspectives doesn't really help very much, because they have not walked in shoes that are resembling some of the people coming before them. And they're sending them to places where they've never even visited before and don't even know what the consequences are of that sentence, don't even fully comprehend what the ramifications are for that person. So it's incredibly refreshing to see potential for that pattern to be knocked on its head.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. I don't know the data. I don't have the numbers, but I would be surprised to learn that every judge who has sentenced someone to prison has actually stepped foot inside of one and just sat down to break bread with someone who was in prison. Prison is not a fun place. It's not a pretty place. It's a scary place. It's an unnatural place. It's an unnatural environment. People were not meant to live in captivity. And so, I take it very seriously when, just as a prosecutor, my offer to a defendant involves incarceration. It's something that I've pondered on. It's not a decision that I've reached quickly or lightly, because I know what the inside of those places look like, and it's just not a place where you want to be. But as Suave had said earlier, unfortunately, it is a place where some people have to be because of what they've done and because of their propensity to commit more crimes. And so they have to be segregated from society. But it's definitely something that I consider before I extend such an offer that involves incarceration.
Wow.
No, I'm just saying that, it's deep when you hear somebody give you that perspective, somebody that worked in the field, because most of the time, the appearance and the belief that our community has towards prosecutors is almost the same that we have with cops.
Yeah.
They're not for us. They're trying to put us in. They're trying, that's the feeling we have towards prosecutors. We look at them just as we look at bad cops. Cops is no good, and we all know that there is some cops. There's some decent human beings, and this is an example of that. We're hearing it from somebody that's in the system that's telling you, like, I give it thought before I even consider putting you in prison. Not all prosecutors do that, because some prosecutors just want that numbers to rack up. They need them numbers to further their career. So they're not considering your potential in life. They're not considering whether you could be redeemed or not. All they're worried about is locking you up and putting you away. And we see that in the early 80s in Philadelphia. We see that in the early 80s, man. And, for those that don't know, almost 500 juvenile lifers in the state of Pennsylvania were incarcerated, and damn near all of them came from Philadelphia. At least 400 something came out of Philadelphia. That tells you what the mind frame of certain prosecutors were. Prosecutors like Lee Abraham, prosecutors like Steph Williams. These people were, and Steph Williams was a black man. Roger King. This guy was known as one of the King executor, got more people on death row and life sentence than any other prosecutor. A black man, Roger King. Steph Williams fought for juvenile life to stay in jail, even when the United States Supreme Court rendered two decisions for us to get out. He fought for us to stay in jail an extra 5 years while he was being investigated and eventually end up locked up too. So that tells you a whole lot. It tells you a whole lot about the mind frame of a prosecutor. So to hear somebody say, like, I consider, before I even give you an offer to put you in jail, like, that shows the level of humanity that certain people have. And that's what's needed in our system. Not just people I'm gonna put 500 people in jails so I can look good, as America's deadliest prosecutor did, which is Lee Abraham. The New York Times made an article on her. So, but again, I go back to what we always say on the show. Our community must do better when we go out and vote. And for those that don't think that your vote matter when it comes to judge and these people that need to get voted on, it does. We're not just talking about voting for election. We're talking about voting for your municipal elections. That's when we need to be involved. We need to be involved when it comes to voting judges and DAs and whoever else needs to get involved. Voted in. Our voice needs to be heard. And right now, if I was in Dauphin County, I would be extremely proud to vote for somebody that look like me, for somebody that understand my community, somebody that I know that if my son or daughter commits a mistake, gonna have a fair chance. And that's all we asking for. So again, and I'm gonna keep saying it, and we're gonna keep saying it to election, like, go out and vote, exercise your voice, use your power, because if you don't vote, then you don't have a say-so in the process. And my name is Suave Gonzalez, and I always approve this message for all our listeners. And Usala Media, is built on educating our community. And this is what we're doing, educating our community. This is a station that bring people like Latasha Williams on, because we understand that there's thousands and thousands of people out there that normally don't get to see a black face in the DA's office. Somebody they make decisions, not somebody that just sit there and the secretary. We're talking about somebody making decisions on your life. So it matters that we bring you to our show so people can see that it's possible. And with that, I pass it on to Dr. Brian O'Neill.
Well, I think that the other really important part here is the ability to admit when there's an error in the system, when somebody's made a mistake. And I think prosecutors at least have the stereotype that they're very reluctant to admit when they make errors. You don't see apologies being issued. You see very begrudging responses, even when the evidence turns out not to be ironclad. Hanging on to the steadfast stubbornness that the person must have been guilty anyway at some point. So that's another thing that we need to see more of, is some humility on the part of prosecutors and judges, that sometimes, because we're human, mistakes happen. And I think that admitting that and being accountable to that is just as important as holding defendants accountable that have broken the law. And sometimes I don't think that part of the system is very good at admitting when they screwed up. So that's something I think that we could certainly see refreshing change to. And that's something I hope that Ms. Williams can also bring to the table. And I think the fact that she knows what happens in prisons, she can also be fairly evaluate somebody come before her that has been in prison to whether they took advantage of things that were in the prison or whether they just did idle time. And so I think she would be a very good judge of evaluating how serious they took it, how well they made up the time that they had. And that's another, I think, real asset, because she has a real clue about what can happen in a prison when you really can assert yourself like Suave did and look at every program available and connect with every person that came in there, which is what he did, as opposed to just getting in the negative stuff while you're incarcerated.
And not only
Obviously
that,
can do it.
I think that Ms. Williams is someone that when you stand in front of her, she has the ability to render the appropriate sentence and treatment, which is important, and not go over proportion. Because someone that works in prison and volunteered in prison have the ability to understand that this person don't need to be put in prison. This person probably needs to be put in a program where he can deal with his substance abuse or emotional abuse versus a prison. And we don't have them type of judges that could distinguish that. To them, is you committed a crime, you're going in. But when you have somebody that can say, you know what, it would do you better to serve 6-7 months or a year in whatever detox program versus prison. You know, and it would save a lot of money to the taxpayers. And with that, we almost got to end the show, but I want to say this, Ms. Natasha Williams, we want to invite you back again. The only difference is we want to do something where our people could call in and you can answer their questions directly. I think people would like to hear from you on this show. So we would like to set that up. Where you can come in and just answer questions for the people, the 1 hour. Just know that Usalat Media Radio is a station that support change. And we believe you that change in Dauphin County. You know,
Thank you so much. It was an honor.
we support anybody in the community that really don't have a voice. We support people that want to move up in life. We give opportunities to people, you know, to express their voice. And this is why Usalat is like the #1 radio station in the community in the tri-state area. And I'm proud to say that. And to the listeners out there, please, Tuesday, February 9th, the Swab podcast will drop nationally on PRX. You can download it any platform that you listen to your podcast. We have exciting shows coming this year. This is our first show of the year. Next week, we'll be listening to 2 individuals directly from Phoenix, SCI Phoenix. It's going to tell us what's going on in there with the corona, and how the jail is treating cases. We're doing that next week. And with that, we want to thank